Oh, this is practice. Welcome to Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. We'll start the webinar in just a few minutes. Welcome to Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. We see several people coming in. Let us know in the chat box if you can hear us. We'll be beginning in a few minutes. Yay. Who can hear us? Thanks, everybody. We're here with Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Let us know you can hear us in the chat box. Thanks, everybody, for letting us know you can hear us. We're about to get started in about 60 seconds. Let's take a look in the chat box, and I'm about to share my screen. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020, Democracy NC's webinar. We see a lot of you in the chat box tonight. Let us know in the chat box quickly if you can see the slide before you that says Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020, and we'll get started in a few seconds. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. We see about 11 people here. We'll just give it a few more seconds. We had dozens of people sign up, so we want to make sure people are here. Just a reminder, we are recording tonight's presentation. You'll receive the recording at the end of this. So if you need to hop off early or don't get your questions answered, you'll have information in the email to get in touch with experts after the fact, and you'll get all the slides and a recording of tonight's webinar. We're about to get started. We'll get ready in another 30 seconds. All right, friends, this is Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. Welcome to our Zoom webinar. We, as always, want to reward the early birds who came in right at 7 o'clock and hope everyone else can join us in the chat. Let us know if you have technical issues, but also let us know if you can hear us and if you can see the slides that we have before you right now. Welcome to our Zoom webinar, Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. This webinar is designed for Democracy North Carolina advocates who are ready, willing, and able to organize in your county to win robust early voting sites and days and hours for the 2020 primary, which is currently slated for February 12th through the 28th in 2020. With some counties already considering their 2020 primary early voting plans, the time for this work is now. So we're so glad you're joining us in October 2019, the first day of October. We call it spooky season here at Democracy North Carolina. And my name is Jen Jones, and I'm the Communications Director at Democracy North Carolina. With me here in person tonight is Caitlin Metzger. She's an early voting advocate who's been helping communities win good early voting plans since around 2016. We're also joined tonight in the chat box by our resident policy and research experts, Democracy North Carolina expert, Executive Director Tomas Lopez, and Sunny Frothingham, our senior researcher. Sunny also authored a report showing the impact of recent early voting changes on the 2018 general election options. So we're so happy to have both of them in the chat box to help answer questions tonight. Again, if you have questions about anything you see in the webinar, please put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We're so happy tonight to be joined by dozens and dozens of Democracy NC advocates from counties all across North Carolina. We know some of you are already seasoned elections watchdogs and advocates here to find out the latest on early voting laws. We also know others of you are new volunteers who are beginning the work to organize early voting advocacy in your counties. Regardless of your experience level, we welcome all of you and thank you so much for stepping up. Before we get started, I just want to take a few seconds to go over some aspects of the Zoom tool that you'll need to know about tonight so that we can all have a smooth experience on the webinar. Some of you may be familiar with Zoom for meetings or video chats. We're using Zoom today as a webinar, which means that all of you should be in view only and listen only mode. That means you should be on mute and have your video off. We ask that you stay this way for the duration of the webinar to help make sure we don't get any background noise that makes it hard for others to hear. First and foremost, you should be able to see the slides I share with you on the screen throughout the webinar. You may also see or hear from Caitlin and my other colleagues occasionally. So if you can hear me well through your computer, that's great. Don't change a thing. I recommend using headphones to hear better if you have them. If you are listening through the computer but the sound quality is bad, you can continue watching your screen but get the audio by dialing in with a phone using the phone call-in and participant code info provided in your confirmation email. You can also find that information if you click on the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen. And next to that, find the up arrow. Again, it's spooky season here at Democracy North Carolina, so that's what I look like today. If you click on that microphone and the up arrow, you can click on your audio options, including a phone number to dial in if your audio is bad on your computer. So if you have questions during the webinar, jot them down in our chat box, which is below. Again, it's spooky season. And we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A period at the end of what I hope is less than an hour-long webinar. We're also recording this webinar and can send that to those of you who need the recording after the webinar is complete. Finally, if you have technical issues during the webinar, use the chat box and someone, probably Caitlin, will attempt to help you resolve those technical issues. Otherwise, we hope the recording of the webinar and the email addresses we'll provide can get you back up to speed. So without further ado, there's our chat box. You can see what it looks like. You can message everyone or a particular someone. Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. The reason we're doing this webinar tonight is absolutely simple. We want to prepare you to win better early voting plans for your county in the 2020 primary election. This campaign is part of our longer and broader strategy to protect and expand the right to vote by building community influence, that's people power, over how elections are run at the local level. So through this webinar and hands-on learning during this campaign, you will better understand our targeted strategy, that's Democracy North Carolina, for early voting and elections administration advocacy. You'll also learn more about the state of our early voting laws, which seem to change all the time these days, the potential changes we could see in 2020, and provide input on what better early voting plans look like in your county. And finally, I want you to understand the decision-making processes for setting up these early voting plans in your county so you can get started right away. So first, I want to very briefly talk about why early voting is so important, especially in the 2020 primary, in protecting and expanding the right to vote. And early voting is important way beyond the fact that it makes voting more convenient. EV reduces long lines at the polls. Thanks to Sunny's research and that of others at the organization, we know that NC has added over 1 million voters to the roll since 2008. High turnout among this population can stress polling places on election day, leading to problems inside and long waits for voters. Here's some long waits going on for voters. We want to minimize that with good early voting plans, and we know people use them. Early voting is used by well over half of North Carolina voters who cast ballots, which relieves a lot of the stress of voting on election day when you have to vote at one precinct. So EV also means more opportunity for all voters. Many voters have a hard time or cannot get off work on election day to vote. If I asked you to raise your hand if you were a working voter, probably everyone would raise their hand in some capacity. I can't see you, but I feel you, and I know you want opportunities for all. EV provides those flexible hours, including evening and weekend hours, so people have more chances to cast a ballot. Flexible hours is what we're about, but we're also about weekends. Saturday and Sunday have the highest early voting turnout rates per hour of any day, with Sunday being the highest. And so voters can use any EV site in their county. They can use weekend hours, and being able to vote out of precinct during early voting in any site in your county, voting on the weekend during flexible hours, it reduces long lines, but it also reduces the use of provisional ballots if you can vote anywhere in your county. EV offers one-stop problem solving for voting issues as well. Voters who have moved recently can update their registration at an EV site in their county. Eligible voters who registered at the DMV or somewhere else and show up to find that their name isn't on the rolls can register and vote during EV using same-day registration. So EV helps bring in new voters too. And new voters can register and vote on the same day during early voting, as we said. But same-day registration during early voting has helped well over 400,000 people cast ballots during early voting. That's especially working class, poor, younger voters who face more barriers to engaging in the voting process. So same-day registration is absolutely critical to helping people who otherwise can't vote. During early voting only, we have same-day registration. So early voting has been crucial to increasing voter turnout in North Carolina. We see that in that 400,000 plus figure of people who use same-day registration during early voting. And if we want more people to participate in elections, we have to use and expand early voting and reforms like same-day registration. And so that's why we're here tonight. And as most of you know, early voting is incredibly important. And if it wasn't, they wouldn't be trying so hard to take it away. Unfortunately, not everyone wants North Carolina counties to have strong early voting plans. How do we know? Well, again, it is spooky season at Democracy North Carolina, and the first reason we know that people are against us a little bit on early voting was the 2013 Monster Voting Law. I know a lot of you remember the 2013 Monster Voting Law. It's the change to early voting most people remember in recent memory. In addition to so many other anti-voter changes, the law sought to slash early voting by 1 week from 17 days to 10. and also eliminate same-day registration. A safety net, as we've said, has saved nearly 500,000 North Carolina voters since 2008. We beat that law in 2016 that the General Assembly proffered when it was challenged in court. And many people were pleased as punched when the monster voting law was taken down, adding back a week of early voting. But the same year we beat the monster voting law, restoring a week of early voting in 2016, the chair of the state's Republican Party, Dallas Woodhouse, sent a memo urging local boards to adopt partisan plans and to cut early voting hours as much as possible. Now, state voting rights activists, folks like Democracy NC, the NAACP, You Can Vote, League of Women Voters, many activists mobilized to make sure early voting advocates packed County Board of Elections meetings to demand strong early voting options for all. As a result, in places like Guilford County, we saw the culmination of an organizing campaign to push the Republican-controlled Board of Elections in that year, back in 2016, to adopt early voting plans with, for example, in Guilford County, 25 sites instead of the 12 they had proposed, and extended voting hours, including Sunday voting, which Republican board members had initially denied. And so the people in this picture represent the Greensboro Voter Coalition, Democracy North Carolina, the NAACP, Beloved Community Center, the League of Women Voters, and many, many other community activists just like you who mobilized, did your research, packed these board meetings, and made it possible to beat back efforts to cut early voting and in some cases expand early voting amid and against all odds. Now, there's one more challenge that we face today. Since 2016, when the monster voting law was overturned by the Fourth Circuit for quote unquote discriminatory intent, which quote unquote targeted African American voters with almost surgical precision, the General Assembly has also revisited and in some cases revived portions of the monster voting law, presumably in the hopes of withstanding future legal challenges. These efforts not only included placing photo ID back as a constitutional amendment on the 2018 ballot, and it will be in place in 2020 if the law stands, but also by passing Senate Bill 325. And if you do not know anything about Senate Bill 325, we will explain it now because it's very important to our early voting advocacy work this year. It had the impact of limiting early voting options in many parts of the state in 2018. And so this is the next big presidential cycle, and we want to explain its impact now. In the summer of 2018, the NCGA hastily enacted Senate Bill 325 and dubbed it the Uniform and Expanded Early Voting Act, which drastically reduced the discretion county BOEs have on designing early voting plans that work for their communities. Now, North Carolina law requires counties to make early voting available at a minimum of one location at the County Board of Elections office and permits counties to establish additional sites throughout the county. These are referred to as satellite sites. We'll call them that tonight. And in past cycles, counties were able to use their discretion about how to best allocate hours throughout the early voting window based on voter usage patterns. For instance, by staying open later on one weekday evening per week, or opening mid-morning, or opening more satellite sites for the last 2 weeks of the early voting period. But the problem is Senate Bill 325 required all satellite sites to be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every weekday and in operation for the entire early voting period. The bill originally proposed eliminating the extremely popular final Saturday in 2018 by moving the early voting period up a day to start on Wednesday instead of a Thursday and on a Friday instead of a Saturday. Now, what does all this mean? Well, lawmakers added back the last Saturday in 2018 after advocates spoke out in opposition. But as the law currently stands, the final popular Saturday of early voting is eliminated for all future elections, including 2020, in even years, okay? So that means in 2020, we don't have that popular last Saturday, despite its popularity among North Carolina voters and disproportionate use by Black and Latinx voters. See, the problem with eliminating the last Saturday is it was the only weekend option in 56, meaning the majority of North Carolina's 100 counties in 2018. That means without it, there may be no weekend option in more than half of North Carolina's counties in 2020. The loss of the final Saturday will limit ballot access for voters across the state. Make no mistake, and more than 2 times the number of voters cast ballots per hour on the last Saturday compared to weekdays in 2018. The last Saturday also garnered more than 4 times the 18 to 25-year-old votes per hour than the weekday average. Finally, I just want to mention the elimination of the last Saturday will disproportionately harm young voters, Black voters, Latinx voters, and voters in certain rural counties, and arguably voters on both sides of the political aisle. So Democracy NC and other partners are currently urging lawmakers, while the long session is still in place in 2019, to make a change as part of our For the People campaign to add back at least that last Saturday for 2020. And in the best case, restore the flexibility that counties need, meaning taking out this 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. requirement, so that counties can build their early voting plans, not people and politicians in Raleigh. So we want them to give them back the flexibility. We want them to restore Saturday. There are a few bills in the hopper that could do this, but as of right now, the last Saturday doesn't exist, and those schedules during the weekdays, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., are still inflexible. And so I am going to operate with you today, and Caitlin's going to operate with you today as if that inflexibility and that Saturday is not there. And so our advocacy looks a little different this time around, but the basics apply. So now more than ever, it's important we defend our existing weekend options, including historical use of the first Saturday in your counties to help workers, and Sunday to encourage souls to the polls. We need to really fight hard for our campus sites and sites assisting underrepresented communities, because in resource squeeze counties, these sites could be on the chopping block in 2020. When they are forced to spend that money on the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to put poll workers there, to open those sites, those standard 12 hours, they may take away sites and hours in other places that are popular to you and your community. And that's where our advocacy lies. So we've been fighting to restore that flexible voting, and we've been working for the people at the General Assembly. But now we are fighting for good early voting plans in your communities using 3 steps, and you're a part of that as of tonight. Those 3 steps are: we need to understand together how these decisions on the county level are being made. We need to set up our goals tonight and start making plans in our counties to fight for good early voting. And finally, our 3rd step is taking action together. We are a team now. Democracy NC, the advocates on this webinar, our friends in the communities that we talked about, we're going to be fighting hard together to take action together. So I just want to let you know that we are working for the 2020 primary. Democracy NC has prioritized pushing for strong early voting plans in over half of North Carolina's counties that not only account for the vast majority of voters in the state, but also have important weekend hours, campus polling places, and sites that historically serve underrepresented groups, all of which are worth defending for next year. So we've chosen these counties strategically because these are counties that have those weekend options and those sites that we think are so important going into 2020, okay? So I mentioned that because I want you to know we've narrowed our focus where we have capacity. We're a small organization. We're working in a majority of counties, but please know that all 100 counties will be considering early voting plans over the next several months. And we highly encourage you to organize in your county, wherever you live and vote, regardless of whether they are one of the 54 counties where we are operating. And the lessons tonight can apply whether we are there or not. So I want you to know that. Now, you've heard me say a few times that Democracy North Carolina is pushing for quote unquote better early voting plans. Well, what does better mean for us? Well, based on the cuts we're facing from Senate Bill 325, and we're assuming we don't have that last Saturday right now, we could get it back. We're assuming we don't have the flexibility that counties need. We could get it back, but we're going to assume we don't. So we're going to fight to defend the weekends we have. That means the first Saturdays in your counties and the Sunday voting in your counties. If you have historically had Saturday voting in your counties, Sunday voting in your counties, we're fighting with you to keep those. We're also fighting to defend students. We already know they're under attack with really chaotic and difficult to comply with student ID rules. Now we're fighting to retain campus polling places that could be on the chopping block because resources are thin in your counties. We need to make the case for our youngest voters. Finally, we're fighting to defend all voters. Access in low income or rural areas, especially to defend sites that create shorter driving and riding distances for underrepresented populations. We need to retain the sites where we can. At the same time as we're pushing for more access, I also want you to remember that when we're looking at past plans, which we provide at our early voting hub, and we say, look at past plans to find out what your county has used in the past to determine your plan for this year. We need to be aware that 2020 is a presidential election cycle. So whether it's the primary or general election, there's going to be higher turnout, and there's going to be a need for more sites and more hours, if possible, to fulfill the needs of the voters in your county. So we want you to keep that in mind, and I'll say more about that later. Okay. So I said before that now is the time for this campaign. I want to stress the urgency because right now the 2020 primary is in March 2020, with early voting set to begin in the middle of February. So regardless of whether the first day of early voting is a Wednesday, as it currently is, or whether it shifts back to a Thursday when Saturday voting, if and when it's restored, mid-February is when early voting is going to begin. And with the holidays ahead, that pushes the time frame for early voting advocacy by county boards up significantly. So we need you to be ready to act as soon as this month. So here's an example of how that works. One of the 54 counties that we're working in is Cumberland County. In past presidential cycles, Cumberland County democracy advocates have effectively used the three steps that we have talked about tonight. So understanding how decisions get made, having a goal and making a plan, showing up and acting together. They have effectively used that to win better early voting plans in Cumberland County. And in 2018, working with HKOJ's coalition, NAACP, Democracy NC, National Organization for Women, the Deltas were there working, NCAE and others, they agreed, these democracy advocates agreed on 4 specific asks. So these were the goals: retain Sunday voting, get a new location, move from Cliffdale Recreation Center, keep Smith Recreation Center open, which is adjacent to an important HBCU, Fayetteville State University, and in a site called Spring Lake, get more consistent hours. So these were their 4 goals, okay? Now, in the past, they've spoken collectively for these asks. They've gotten a sense about when the board will work on its plans and make sure the public is invited to these meetings. They've made sure pastors and other influence makers in the community can speak on behalf of their congregations in support of retaining Sunday voting. They have had active duty military, because military means so much in Cumberland County. They've had them come to the Board of Elections meetings to advocate for Sundays because of stringent work schedules. And they've made sure that the student body president from Fayetteville State University has been there to defend sites that are close to campus, okay? So they've had students, people of faith, working people, military folks, other people come and speak in favor of these specific asks. They've tried other creative tactics to emphasize the importance of a better early voting plan. They've circulated short films on social media that showed how Smith Recreation Center had been an important historic voting place. They filled the room at every single meeting using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram to encourage people to come to meetings. And they've identified a board member who will be willing to break any bad unanimous votes and petition the state board for an alternative non-unanimous plan if necessary to advocate for better early voting. And we'll talk a little bit about that process in a minute. But I'm just talking specifically about how one county has acted together, made a plan, and learned who their decision makers were to ask for this plan. And it was effective. And I really want to talk about Cumberland County because in the past it has been effective, but now with Senate Bill 325 and the complications it creates, there could be new challenges, okay? Losing the flexibility from Senate Bill 325, meaning money that was going to be spent on sites and hours that work for our communities is now going to a standard 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. weekday schedule, meant in 2018 fewer early voting sites for 43 of North Carolina's 100 counties. 2/3 of North Carolina counties were forced to eliminate weekend hours because those hours were put on weekdays. So not only was the final Saturday cut in Cumberland County and all 100 counties, but the inflexibility of early voting requirements made it difficult for the Board of Elections in Cumberland to maintain sites historically used by underrepresented communities. That is the threat. That is why we're saying we have to defend weekends, we have to defend campus, and we have to defend underrepresented community sites. Because Cumberland is a good model for what happens when we haven't done that because we've been surprised by new legislation. What it looked like in Cumberland County, at least back in 2018, is they were forced to cut 3 early voting sites because of this lack of resources. East Regional Library, E.E. Miller, and Smith Recreational Center. If you're not from Cumberland County and don't know those sites, that's okay. The important thing to understand is that Smith Recreational Center, 95% of the voters who used it in 2014 were Black. 73% of the voters who cast ballots at E.E. Miller were Black. These are the underrepresented communities in Fayetteville, in Cumberland County, who we are seeking to protect because these are important sites that provide shorter rides and access for underrepresented communities. And understanding that, Cumberland County activists now know that these sites or ones near them would really be worth defending because of the communities they serve, okay? So the impact of this was that 6,905 voters who used these sites in 2014 might not have been able to in 2018 because the sites near them were closed. Why does it matter that these few low turnout sites were closed? In a lower turnout election in 2014, 6,905 voters used these sites. But remember, in 2008, only 14,177 total votes across all of North Carolina was the difference between one president winning North Carolina's electoral votes or losing them. In short, it only takes a few thousand votes to swing a presidential election. We're not even talking about the races down ballot. And so these sites make a huge difference, especially when they're used and especially when they're utilized by underrepresented populations. That, friends, is why we are working tonight for better early voting plans in 2020. So we can identify these important sites and we can fight for them. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend Caitlin Metzger, who is going to talk about the second part of our 3-part plan, figuring out how decisions are made. And she's going to help you do that too, because there are big changes in store as well.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jen, for kicking us off. So as we've said before, understanding how and when these decisions are made is a big key to winning. In any campaign, we have to map out who our targets are and how to influence them. In organizing, the word target is used to describe the people with the power who give you what you want. Those are the decision makers. So who are the targets that we're talking about? You've heard us say the decision makers just a few minutes ago. These are the folks who can decide early voting plans. We're going to do a quick pop quiz. So pop up that chat box if you haven't already. We want to hear from you. This is just your best guess. Who do you think gets to decide these early voting plans? Is it A, the appointed elections board, state elections board? Is it B, the appointed county elections board? Or is it C, the paid county elections staff? We have a couple, let's see, on the staff or the chat box. All right, we're seeing a couple options here. Again, your pop quiz is who gets to decide these plans? Is it the state board? Is it the county board? Or is it the paid county election staff? Okay, I see a lot of correct answers. Congratulations to everyone who said B. The main target, the main decision maker that we're going to talk about is the appointed county elections boards. So congratulations to everyone who chose that. Early voting plans are often crafted by or with major input from the paid county election staff, but they have to get final approval from the County Board of Elections members. Those are the folks who actually vote on the plan. The vote at the county level must be unanimous, and if it's not, any single county board member can file an alternative plan, and that heads up to the State Board of Elections. So the county boards of elections are our main targets, but State Board of Elections members, as well as some county staff, are what we'd call secondary targets. Those are people who influence the primary targets. All right. Now, because the county board members are primary targets, I want to spend a short minute talking about their structure, because it's changed a little bit since the last time we had this conversation, right? Currently, right now, every county board has 5 members. They have 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats, the majority being from the party of the governor. Under this new structure, all 100 county boards have a Democratic chair. There's the chair. The chair has the authority to call the meetings, to set the agenda, lead the meetings. In other words, they get to control key parts of this decision-making process. So I'm telling you this because when we're organizing to influence or put pressure on these targets, we need to view these people as people, right? These are our early voting champions of those 5 member boards. So for this campaign, we're targeting boards of elections members, not the entire board as a whole, as one entity. We need to know which board members we can count on, which board members support our ideas about what makes a good early voting plan, and the ones who might not. We need to get support from all of the members who will get us to a unanimous vote. And we need to know if any of the 5 members would be willing to block a bad plan. Okay. Yeah, okay. This is an important leveraging point. One last thing about the structure. The State Board of Elections structure has also changed a little bit. The new structure right now has 5 State Board of Elections members, as opposed to it used to be 9. The majority is also here from the party of the governor. So there's 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans on the State Board of Elections right now. Votes on early voting plans at the state board level must be made with the majority of members present. So to recap, just briefly, the county board has paid staff that helps them craft plans. They can offer, information to the county boards. But the primary target here is a unanimous early voting plan passed by your 5-member county board. But if it's going to pass a bad plan, if your county board looks like it might have a bad plan, the helpful thing would be to target 1 member who could file an alternative plan. Because anytime a non-unanimous plan happens at the county level, it automatically goes to the state board level. Okay. Let's see. All right. So the next part about taking action, now that you know the structure of the county and statewide boards. I can't tell you exactly what the deadline is. As Jen mentioned before, it could start right now. There are a couple counties who have already talked about this and even voted on early voting plans that start next year. So it will be on a rolling basis over the next weeks, maybe months. What we do know is that we have to be ready to be able to take action together. So our simple plan is this. First, find out when your county board of elections meets and what's on the agenda. Those are public meetings. So you should call ahead, confirm those times once you get a meeting announcement. A great pro tip is to get on the media announcement list so you know when those boards of elections meetings are. Typically they're at least once a month, but you might see a whole lot coming up in October and November because we have this really fun thing happening called municipal elections. So county boards of elections are very active right now. There's a lot of meetings happening in October and November. Once you find out when those meetings are, call ahead and confirm, and plan on bringing a friend. Share it on social media. Let people know when those boards are meeting because those are the decision makers. The next thing is to gather intelligence. Contact one of those members or the executive director if you know that person, or any other staff member who might work at your county boards of election if you might have a relationship with one of those people. Try to get a sense and ask them what the preliminary plans, if there is one, for early voting sites, what does it include? What's the schedule and the process for making a decision? Will they consider or support opening early voting sites on a Sunday? And what would persuade them to open sites on the first Saturday hours or a Sunday later? So these are people. Remember, these are our targets, but they're just regular old people just like us. So if you have a relationship with either your county board members, your executive director of the county board, or other staff members, it's a great idea to start talking to them and gather this intelligence. That will help you for the next part of the plan, which is to organize and plan ahead of the meeting. We have a great hub on the Democracy website. We'll be sending that around to you guys. You can review past plans, work with allies who have some stake in these plans, draft a plan. If you ask folks what's already included in the early voting plan, maybe you could even offer some suggestions. If you know about a community center or a college that should be a part of the plan, you can make that suggestion ahead of time. Let's see. Look at the plans from the previous elections, but again, like Jen said, remember that this is a presidential election, and so we want a lot of options as much as we can get. We want to pay good attention to the locations with good access for underrepresented voters. Think about student voters, think about voters of color, rural voters, and that's what you want to be looking for in your past early voting plans too. All right, next thing, hone your tactics. Conducting a campaign to win your goal like you would for any other issue. So consider tactics like holding a meeting with each board member with a diverse group of stakeholders. Attending the Board of Elections meetings with others. It's always good to bring a crowd. And if discussion of early voting isn't on the agenda, it's still a good idea to be there. We want you to be involved in these decisions all year round. Take a faith leader, or a campus leader to push for Sunday voting or a site on or near campus. Speak out. Often these county boards of elections offer public comment period. So that's a great way. If you haven't met with your county boards ahead of time, you can offer public comment at the meeting. All right. Coming back to, all right, next, don't overdo it. Using the prior plans and intel to find out what was in place before is a great idea, but just keep in mind, it's important not to advocate for additional hours or sites unless you're confident they will be used, because poor use can set a bad precedent and make it harder to advocate for additional sites and hours in the future. Example, if you've never had a Sunday in your county, now might not be the time for the 2020 primary to make that ask for it. We might do that a little bit later, but just keep in mind, we don't want to overdo it right now. Follow the process. County boards of elections are required to announce their meetings and agenda ahead of time. The discussion and vote should be held in a public meeting in public view. So keep showing up. As I mentioned, there's going to be lots of boards of elections meetings happening in October. You might go to 3 in a row and they don't talk about early voting, but you still need to go to the 4th one because some of these discussions might happen before the actual vote shows up on the agenda. Yeah. And then report back. We want to hear what happens. We're going to send this out to you via email, but this is the short link. It's demnc.co/evtips. There's a report back link there. It's a Google reporting form. If you go to any county board of elections meeting, we want to hear from you. We want to know what was discussed, which county board members said what the schedule or the early voting schedule might include. We want all that intel. We want to hear what you heard right there on the ground. We want communication to be a two-way street. So we're going to send you a lot of information. We're going to email you and keep you up to date, but we also want you to send us information back. Like Jen said, we can't be in all 100 counties, but every single county is making these decisions over the next weeks or maybe months. And so as much information as you can share with us, that will just help this process along. I'm going to turn it back over to Jen Jones to do our final steps.
Thank you, Caitlin Metzger. And I just want to make it clear that we can do this. I often think about the success we had in 2016 when our backs were against the walls and we thought we were going to get bad early voting plans, and the momentum that started in Greensboro with 300 people at a county board of elections meeting, such a big crowd, they had to move it to the county commission room, and people knowing exactly what they wanted. They wanted Sunday, they wanted good sites, they wanted campus sites. They didn't want hours and times eliminated during a presidential election cycle. That energy drifted to other counties. So from Guilford County, it went to Mecklenburg, it went to Halifax, it went to New Hanover. County boards of elections were seeing unprecedented numbers of people showing up and showing out with specific asks. And so I just want you to understand that in Greensboro, it was 300 people working together to pack the BOE and make sure nothing bad passed in the darkness, and more importantly, that nothing bad passed at all. And because of this organizing effort, the one we're talking about, the one we're kicking off tonight with you, we saved every single Sunday voting option that had existed in counties in about a quarter of North Carolina counties to that point against all odds. And that was based on the work of y'all. So that's the good news. That's the good news, is we've had a great start to our early voting advocacy already. Of the 3 counties we know of that have adopted early voting plans for 2020 so far, or are talking about serious, almost unanimous plans, all 3 plan to host Sunday voting hours. That's Wake, Durham, and Brunswick. And so we'll be fighting for those counties and with those counties, but also with yours as well. And 3-0 sounds like a good number to me. We also just got a text while we're doing this webinar that Guilford County has passed a good early voting plan with campus hours and sites, because A&T's Aggies showed up at the County Board of Elections meeting, made their voices heard at the direction of democracy activists like you. So it's an incredible time to be doing this work, and it's going to have such an impact in 2020. So in conclusion, I want to talk about next steps with you. And here's what's next after this webinar. You're going to get a follow-up email. You're going to get a recording of this webinar. I know it was a lot of information. It may have been difficult to follow. There's a lot to tell you in an hour before people's eyes and ears glaze over. So we wanted to get it into this webinar and get you a recording so you could hear it and share it with your fellow democracy activists in your county. You're going to get a PDF of this slide deck. Not only will you get the short links to all the URLs and information that we're sharing, but you're going to get the detailed structure of the boards. You're going to get an understanding of who's making the decisions. And you're going to get those special tips and tidbits of information about how to hone your tactics, even the most creative tactics of using social media and organizing your friends, family, community, and neighbors to come to meetings with you as the next big effort to push for better voting in 2020. You're going to get links to our EV Advocacy Hub on the websites where we have the latest tools and research. Again, it's demnc.co/EVTips. It includes a link to our report form. So you go to a meeting, you can fill out that report form. You can let us and the other democracy activists in your county know what's happening at the meetings, even if we can't attend with you. There are helpful advocacy resources. And there are past primary plans from 2016, 2012, and 2008 that can be helpful as a starter plan to see where sites and how many sites and what kinds of weekend hours we are looking at in your neck of the woods. We'll also have a list of Democracy NC organizers in your region with their contact information, so you can work with them because they'll be working in your county as well to help you share intel, share information, and get helpful tips for organizing in your community. It is so on. So again, we're going to review our follow-up email. We'll send you the stuff we just talked about. We'll send you everything we shared tonight. We're going to connect you with others, whether it's our organizers or other democracy activists in your community. We are going to start attending meetings together. We can help there too. If you sign up for demnc.co/alerts, if you didn't find out about the webinar through our email list, this is how you sign up for it, and we'll be sending information at least to our supporters in those 54 target counties to give them updates on when Board of Elections meetings are coming up in their communities. Finally, our email alerts. I just want to reiterate, if you are not currently on our email list, we don't just email you about early voting in Board of Elections meetings in your neck of the woods. We send you actions to support early voting at the legislature and beyond. So please sign up for our email alerts if you're not currently on there. And finally, we have an early voting advocacy hub. We keep it updated year round, but this is the time, this is crunch time where we really start bearing down at these meetings and making asks that are important. So just a reminder, our early voting advocacy hub is demnc.co/evtips, where you'll find this information if you don't get it in your email. And don't forget to check your spam folders. Some of this information may go to them first. If not, you can ask us questions now or email us here. And again, you're going to get these slides immediately after this webinar. Jen@democracync.org, that's me. Caitlin@democracync.org, that's Caitlin. And you can ask us questions. But now is the time to ask any questions that have not been answered in the chat box. And Caitlin and I are going to talk about 2 or 3 of the most frequently asked questions and share them with the rest of the team. Kitch, is there anything that's popping up?
Question that says, will you give us a list of the 54 counties?
We can give you a list of the 54 counties. And what I want you to know about those 54 counties is even if you are not in them, we are willing to help. We've been doing this a long time. We know the best practices for getting in touch with county boards of elections, even in rural communities. And so what we plan to do is reach out to you, find out what counties you're in, and let you know if they match to the 54 counties we're working in. If not, inevitably we have supporters in the other 46 counties in the state, and we can also help there too. So absolutely. Okay.
If there's any other questions, type them in now if you have questions.
Yeah, we're going to give an extra 30 seconds to type in questions. As I said at the beginning of our webinar tonight, Democracy NC has picked those 54 counties. But if you're not in one of the 54 counties, we hope you'll self-organize using the resources we'll provide you after this webinar. I really want to emphasize that you can do this. This was everyday people going to Board of Elections meetings that beat back bad plans in 2016, that helped to get better plans in 2018, even though Senate Bill 325 had passed, and can really do the same thing in 2020 going into a high turnout presidential election cycle. Are there any other questions? All right. So without further ado, I just want you to know, if you have more questions, that were not answered earlier in this webinar, you can email us at jen@democracync.org or caitlin@democracync.org. If you will give us a little bit of time, we will get back to you first thing in the morning. I know it's late for everyone. And you can also stay tuned for tips and tools at demnc.co/evtips. I just want to remind you, Democracy North Carolina is a statewide organization with organizers working on the ground in your region even now. We are gearing up for 2020 even now, making new hires, filling new spaces, getting ready to work with you for better early voting plans, a more informed electorate facing voter ID, and more. So here are your organizers as of right now. These will change in a few weeks, but I just wanted you to know who you could contact in your neck of the woods if you want to get in touch with someone who is already working at your county board of elections to make early voting an option for you. You will get this slide as part of the slide deck for signing up here, and so every single one of these people will be there for you. You can also find these folks at our website, democracync.org. So don't forget to connect with organizers in your region. You can also connect with Caitlin and I if you have more questions, and we'll be sending you more information tonight. So without further ado, I'm gonna try to, it is 7:52. We kept our promise to get you out of here early, but I wanna thank you for attending Winning Better Early Voting Plans in 2020. Look for emails from us soon, and have a great night.